Amber, do you want to give me a heads up when it's ready to, when you want me to start?
You can go ahead and start now. I just started recording for you. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, I guess I'll wait for a couple more people. All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Kwaku Wampong. Looks like most of you I've worked with before, so should know me. Today's training is all about template creation in OpenRoads, which is pretty identical to template creation in inroads or power inroads. Generally, you start with an alignment, create your template, and then you work on your model, create your corridor using that template that you create. Some models may require several different templates. In my case, I generally use one template and use something called display rules to display certain components at certain events. Let's say if we have a curb, no curb, I'll use display rule to transition between the two. But I'll show that in a little bit, probably towards the end of the session. So here, first things first, general rule of thumb is to copy out the SHA template library, which is generally, or is an ITL file, which stands for template library. It's saved on our project details, I believe. There's a SHA library with all of their feature definitions and workspace standards. You save it within your inroads directory in your project folder. Typically, I rename it. Once you have that done, you can open up OpenRoads or Power Inroads, go under Components, Create Template, and this window should pop up. And under this window, OpenRoads and Inroads have like generic template libraries that aren't associated to any workspace. Once you're in there, you may see something like default like this with some components in there, but you would still need to open up your template library, which I actually already had opened prior to this training. So today, I guess we're going to go through the creation of a template. An example that I'm going to use is, let's say we have a corridor that requires two 12-foot lanes, curbed, and sidewalk with ditch behind it. So generally how I do templates is I use the components in the SHA template library, so I don't have to worry about setting any feature definitions that may affect the layout of my corridor model. So once you have the template library open, you can open up components and look within each of these component folders to find the elements that you need for your model. So I mentioned 2-foot lanes. So here I'm going to go into the training folder, create a new template. Name this training. And then within here, I'm going to start picking out the components that I would need for two 12-foot lanes curbed with 5-foot sidewalk and ditch. So here we're looking for pavement. In this case, I'm just going to use something simple. Just going to use the milling surface. So all you have to do essentially to pull over your component from the SHA library is select the template that you would like to use, go into the preview window, and drag from whichever point you'd like to set as your origin. So here we're going to say that the center line or the middle of the roadway is our origin. Just going to drag and drop it in here. And then in order to snap it to the center or 0, 0 point, which is your template origin, you can just right click on the center line point and click change template origin. It should snap there for you. So first things first, I guess I'm going to go through each of these templates have points which have constraints associated to them. A constraint may be a horizontal feature, vertical feature, or a slope. In this case, let's say this point right here has a slope and a horizontal constraint. Typically, when it's red, it means that there are two constraints associated to that point. When it's yellow, there's one constraint, and when it's green, there's no constraints. Hence why this center line, when it's green, there's zero constraints. And this center line will typically run off of your horizontal and vertical alignment, which in your corridor model, you can constrain to the horizontal and vertical profile that you develop using something called point controls. So another thing about these constraints have labels associated to them. Generally, I set labels, let's say slope constraint. They'll allow you to change that specific constraint within your corridor model itself. Let's say in this case, if I have a slope where I know that my slope will transition from 2% to 1% over a specific interval, I can set the slope constraint within the template and then go in my corridor model and use the parametric constraint tool to create that transition in the slope. Or you could use a super elevation tool. If you want to create super elevation, it's important to always set your super elevation flag to the points that you know beforehand will be super elevated in your corridor model. In this case, I'm going to turn it off. 5. Okay. And then 2 12-foot lanes, curve. Looking for curve and gutter. Drag and drop. Merge with 5 million point. And then on the left side, as you can see, this curve and gutter comes in as if it's a curve and gutter on the right side of my corridor. What you can do is, as you're dragging it in, using your left button on your mouse pad, you hold it, right click, and then you can reflect. And it'll just flip it for you. And snap and merge with my filling surface point. We're going to put our sidewalks. We're just going to say that it's at the back of the curb for simplicity. Select this point. See which one's simple to use. I'll just use any of them. It's not too big of a deal. So I'm going to bring in this grass ditch. I know that I want it to tie into the back of my sidewalk, so I'm going to drag it in from this point here and then snap it to my back of sidewalk. And then similarly for the other side, I'm going to do this. Should flip it. And then with each template you create, generally you want to set some end conditions so that you know what your grading limits are. There are end condition components in SHA ITL. I think the ITL that I'm currently using is actually the OpenRoads Imperial ITL. And I decided to use it just because I'm using OpenRoads specifically for this training, even though OpenRoads and inroads template creation process is identical. So I'm gonna go into the end condition component library and then find the end. So for this case, I'm just going to use combined just to show cut fill on both sides. And then there's something that you can do, which is called setting a priority to essentially tell inroads to look for one cut slope first, the next cut slope second, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to place this do cut and fill on the right side here. Cut and fill. So as I was mentioning, priorities, it can be set by, priorities can be set to components by double clicking the component itself. And once you do that, it opens up a component properties window in which you can edit these priority labels here. If we scroll through it, you can see that the template library has priorities preset, but depending on your grading and your constraints in your model, you can set these priorities accordingly. In this case, it's setting cut as the #1 priority, which would generally create a great impact since you're grading flatter than a 2-to-1 slope. So sets the 6-to-1 cut as #1 priority. I guess generally I would probably set this last, and then I would set the priorities in order of the steepest slope so that I have less impact in my corridor model. All right, so this is just a general template that you could use for 2 12-foot lanes, curbed sidewalk with ditch on both sides. There are some other things that you'd have to do in your corridor model, obviously, to make everything or to engineer everything correctly. Like, let's say what I like to do personally is apply point controls to points that I know need to be profiled or have certain elevations. But something that you could do, I guess, is also, like I mentioned earlier, set constraint labels. Let's say if I wanted the depth of my ditch to be something specific or transition from a specific depth to another depth within a specified distance, I would create a label here. Let's say ditch depth. This isn't the correct one because the vertical is 0. This is just 5. So we would use this point here. Vertical minimum. This already has a label set, so I could go in my parametric constraints in my model file and set a transition for the ditch depth based on stations and this value here. So it started for example, and I could set it from 4 to 2 over like a 50-foot station interval. Another thing that I would like to go over is display rules. So display rules allow you to see certain components at given locations. Let's say, for example,
sorry to
yes,
interrupt you. Before you jump onto the display rules, can you go back to the previous screen? I just want to have a question, a real quick question.
Yep.
So you just covered the end conditions.
Correct.
I guess in that dialogue where you get into the end condition where you were setting up the priorities and everything, could you explain the purpose of having that? Why we have the priorities and also another thing I don't know if you covered and if everybody understands the different types of rules that we have set up within that and that how that correlates to the design, the actual design that you're working on a project.
Okay, so priorities, I mean, obviously everybody knows what the word priority means. So let's say, for example, I have a limited right of way and I want to reduce grading impact. In that case, I'd want the steepest slope to be my #1 priority. So I want to tie in sooner. So in that case, I would set, let's say, my 2-to-1 cut slope and my 2-to-1 fill slope to either 1 or 2. So those are my first 2 priorities. So it's going to prioritize those tie-in locations versus these others shown here. So that's pretty much like the general of priorities. It's just to prioritize these end conditions in order.
So can you go to the test and kind of show how it switches from one rule to another, how that priority actually works?
Okay, so I don't think I have a surf. Okay, I do have a surface attached here.
Yeah.
So in this model, in the template, I think the default priority was 6-to-1 was #1. So as you can see, it's tying it at 6-to-1 first, but let's say this is our 6-to-1 slope on the inside. Let's say if we want to prioritize 2-to-1 first, we'd go back in Here, select the component. Adjust these priorities accordingly. And it's also general rule of thumb, don't have two end conditions as the same priority. Otherwise, your corridor model may not run correctly. So I'm gonna have to set all these others as well to make sure that they're not the same as.
In addition to the priority, I think you need to have a constraint as well. For each priority, there is a constraint too. So for priority 1, 2-to-1 slope, for 2-to-1, let's say 6-to-1 slope, 6-to-1 slope, you give a constraint to that for the 6-to-1 slope to go look for the existing ground within 30 feet, let's say.
Yep.
You have to give that limit as well. So if it will look for that existing ground within that 30 feet. If it does not catch that existing ground within 30 feet, it will go to the priority number 2. That's how it works.
Yep.
Yeah,
So-
that is what I was alluding to before. So you can set up whatever priorities, but the priorities depend on the constraints that you have set up. So these are basically alternate solutions. And so each alternate solution applies to certain conditions. So if the existing ground varies, depending on the height of that fill or depth of that cut, or the offset from your edge of pavement, however way you are defining that, that's how those priorities would work. Yeah. So Kwaku, if you can just like quickly show that, like, yeah, so that end, yeah, that's the
Okay.
point.
Yep, in this case, it might be overridden just because I have the end condition set as infinite. So if you want to set priorities over, like, let's say, find 2-to-1 within 12 feet, you'd have to toggle this off under each point. So let me go through that real quick. Condition is off, off.
So the end condition is infinite. It's only going to work for the steepest slope. You don't need to put it for each and every side daylight slope. It will only be for the steepest slope.
And so SHA has a standard detail for cut and fill. Those are used for major highway projects. For majority of your projects that you have been working on, you're probably using 2-to-1 for most of the projects for tie-in. Just so you know that when you're working on like a widening project on a major highway, like I-81, for example, I know you guys are working on that, some of you. That may not be the case where you are doing a 2-to-1 because you don't want a traffic barrier. Because when you're doing 2-to-1, it's a critical slope and you need a traffic barrier. So on a major highway like that, there will be fill slopes that would not be shielded by a barrier. Especially if you have like a very wide right of way. In those types of situations, SHA, the template that Kwaku is showing you, there is a variable end section template already that you can use. And that should give you the solution. In some cases, you may have to tweak it a little bit, but most of the cases that will give you the solution that you need, or at least give you some ideas of where your cut and fills are coming with that solution, and then you can modify it as necessary.
Yeah, even 3-to-1 needs a traffic barrier. So any slope which is like 4-to-1 or flatter, then you don't need traffic barriers. So.
Okay, and as Pushkar was mentioning earlier, you can kind of see the priorities at work on the right side. As we increase like the length of the cut fill, you can see which condition takes priority here. On the right side, just the test. All right, and then another good tool I guess you can use is template library organizer. Let's say if you have a template from another library for a different project that you'd like to copy over. This is probably the ideal method of copying stuff over rather than trying to copy directly from the template folder into your project, which generally doesn't work. You can find the project location and drag it over into your active design file. And then I guess I can go over display rules now.
So Kwaku, did you cover the ditch portion already? How you need to seek the ground and then continue with the widths and all that?
How I need to, can you repeat that?
Yeah, once you do that, whatever slope you have, and you meet the existing ground, right? And then you continue with whatever that the ditch width is.
Yeah, I can
Mhm.
answer that question, Habib. Great question. So I think we should define what's an end condition and what's the backbone. They call it the backbone of the design of the template. So the roadway, sidewalk, like roadway pavement, sidewalk, curb and gutter, all of that as part of, and the safety grading is part of the backbone. Now, what happens is typical workflow. The highway people will give you the grading up to the back of the sidewalk. Now, if you have a ditch, you are proposing a grass swell or any other ESD facilities, bioswells, those things, those will need to be graded separately. And a lot of the times you guys grade, water resources people would grade those. I don't know if anybody from water resources are here. So you will grade those a lot of times by hand, but we will need to grade it in OpenRoads. And so that part becomes part of the backbone. So Habib's question, what happens to the ditch? That's not part of the end condition. It will be part of the backbone. And once it's part of the backbone, it's gonna always draw that element. Only the end condition is the element that is variable. Means it varies. The solution varies based on the existing ground or the topo. And you can control that. So and for ditch section, there could be a situation where you would need to design a roadway and you're trying to determine whether you need a ditch or like I had a project where I had a diversion ditch. So we had like a regular grass ditch next to the roadway, and then we had another diversion ditch, and it was variable. So there could be situations like that where you would need to design the ditch as an end condition. And if you do that, then it needs to be defined with priority rules, display rules, which Kwaku is going to show you next. And by creating display rules and parent-children relationship in there, you can make a case where the ditch will be designed or graded to fulfill certain conditions. It's a little bit complicated, but it can be done that way. But like I said, typically it is done as a part of the backbone. Is if you exactly know where the ditch is going to be, how deep it's going to be, what would be the forward slopes and back slopes, then it can be defined that way within the template.
Yep. So like Pushkar was saying, you can use display rules for this. There's also another method where you can use just modeling a corridor off of a corridor and model the ditch separately as its own corridor with its own template. And if you do that, then you wouldn't need to provide a ditch as shown in this template here. But let's say in the case that we don't want a ditch, we can set a display rule. And a display rule typically requires like a trigger to set it on or off. In order to create that trigger, you would create a null point by right-clicking your mouse anywhere within the template, selecting null point, dropping it right above the center line. You can realistically drop it anywhere. I'm just going to say that like a foot offset from my center line would be my trigger to activate that display rule. So in this case, I'm going to say no ditch right, for example, on equals 1. And I'm going to say my horizontal, so it's going to be constrained to my center line point. The vertical doesn't matter too much. It can be 2 feet, 1 feet, whatever. The horizontal point is what's going to trigger it. So this value, original, will be set to 0. I'm just going to say, for this case, vertical set to 0.5. And then once you have that trigger set, that's when you start to apply your display rules. So you click your component for which you want the display rule set to. See this here, display rules, edit. And in this case, there are already display rules in this template, but I'll show you guys how to create one. Just click add rule number 1. So I'm going to call this the same thing as my null point. no ditch right on the type of display rule would be horizontal, so it'll be triggered if it's offset from the center line by a certain distance. It's going to be between my ditch right on point and my center line point. Call this 1, which would be the trigger. Press OK. And then here you see my display rule created. So I'm going to set it to this ditch line here, the 4 slope. So no ditch, even though that's not the right side, but actually let me set it to the right side just so it can make sense. Edit, no ditch right, click OK. And you can see how that line there disappeared. But if you want to see what components are active in your file, regardless of display rules, just click display all components and you can see here. So in the case that I have no ditch on the right side, this would be displayed. Let's say, for example, I wanted just a fill slope and a cut slope at 2:1 on this side when no ditch is displayed. I would bring in my cut slope. So then I would set display rules to these to actually display when there's no ditch on the right side. And I can remove this display rule here. So as you can see here, let me see if I can test this for you guys. So let's say in the case that this condition is true, it will display this, but right now it's displaying both components. So the cut fill at 2:1 with the ditch. So if I want to eliminate this ditch entirely, what I would do is set a display rule to this to say that it's not going to display when this is triggered, no ditch right. So not selected rule, and then I'm going to have the, you can either apply it to all of these elements or all these components here, or make this the parent component of all these other components, which is probably the simplest method. So what I'm going to do is find out what this component is called, TC, press slope to right. So I'm going to go here, set that parent component. Sure, so it's R1.
So parent-child, if Kwaku, you can explain what that means.
Okay, so a parent component, I mean, it's parent-child. So one follows the other. So if this is your parent component and these are your child components, then whatever happens to this component, these others will follow the same rules.
Exactly. Simply to remember that children don't exist unless parent exist. So
So just for simplicity, so I don't have to go through all these, I'm just going to do it for just the ditch portion. And save this and test it. So I'm going to trigger on the no ditch right rule. You can kind of see what happens here. Everything associated to that parent component, which as of now we set the bottom of the ditch and the back slope of the ditch to be child components of that parent for slope. So you can see what happens when you do that. You can just ignore what's on the far right side here, but right. And then I guess another cool tool that you can use in here is dynamic settings, which allows you to place a component accurately in a template that's specified widths, lengths, and slopes. I know a lot of people like to place components like this rather than dragging and dropping from this window or just drawing them themselves within the template. Is there anything else specific that you want me to go over, Pushkar?
Oh, I think you did show most of the tools. I would like to slow down a little bit and maybe ask a question to all of the attendees. I know we have a lot of newer people here also. How many of you, if you can show a raise of hands, have used InRoads and this tool particularly that Kwaku is showing already on your projects? Okay, I see Redit, Shaik, Encore. Anybody else? How about JC? Have you used it? No.
Okay, I see some questions in the.
Gerard, you have not used it? I'm surprised. Okay. Gerard is, yeah. All right. So yeah, so if you're designing and grading for roadway work or even water resources work, this is a tool that you would be using. It may not be exactly look like this. It might look something different, but you still, anytime you're using InRoads or OpenRoads or Power InRoads, whichever you call it, Bentley programs, they're template-based design. So you have to define a template. You have to run it along a baseline. So that's how the software works. So the template is the brain of the design. So whatever you are designing horizontally, you really need to put the intelligence into this template so that the ultimate design that you're trying to achieve comes from this. So there is a lot of thought that goes into that, and it's also a couple of things you didn't cover, Kwaku, is which I would like you to cover, is the importance of naming the points, the components, and the solutions uniformly, because otherwise when you run the template, you're going to get into an issue where the triangles will not be uniform and everything will be named incorrectly, and you'll run into a lot of issues when you cut cross sections, and even the design will be a mess to clear. So when you're creating templates, it's very important that you follow a certain naming convention. So if you can spend a little time about that naming convention and how that works, how the mirroring works, how the some of those tools that I don't think you covered detail.
Okay, so generally, if you use the SHA template library and pull their components, you don't have to worry about renaming stuff just because they already have names and feature definitions set. But these are very important for things like cross-section annotation, identifying like certain break lines in your corridor after you create your terrain model. Let's say if you want to manually edit your terrain model and you don't have the proper names set to any of these, it would be kind of difficult to identify what point is what. You may have like a sub baseline in your break lines in your terrain model that you want to get rid of, but there's like the name associated to it is incorrect. So you may delete the wrong line instead, right? So naming is extremely important. It's a good identifier of what line represents what in your template when you create a triangle file, for example. I guess one of the future trainings, I'm gonna run through using one of these templates, running through a corridor and showing you guys exactly what it displays for you after you run it through a corridor. So you kind of have a better idea of what these names stand for and the importance of these names as well as the feature definitions here. And then did I go over the parametric constraint labels at all?
Probably not.
Okay, so these are also very important. If you have a label set to a constraint or any of these parametric constraints, let's say, for example, here we have a label set to the horizontal width of the top of curb. Let's say in your design file, this isn't a general use case, but let's say if your top of curb width changes from half a foot to a quarter of a foot, you can go inside of your design file and save this out. Then use a tool called parametric constraints, create parametric constraint to set that label. If you have that label set and you run your corridor model, you would see it here. So you can set that label and change the start and stop value to create that transition from half a foot to quarter of a foot, for example.
And one thing to note there, Kwaku, is those parametric labels have a sign, like it can be positive or negative. So if you are applying, let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say you are designing a roadway with 10-foot wide shoulders, and you want a parametric label set to the shoulder width. And so if it is on the left side of the center line, it will be defined as a positive. If it is on the right side of the center line, it will be maybe the other way. So depending on which side it is, it's going to change its sign. So if you're using that parametric label, both on the left side and the right side, that's where you have to be careful whether you're applying. So if you, let's say you wanted to transition it to a 4 feet shoulder, but if it's on the other side and you define it as 4, what it will happen is the shoulder will be drawn on the opposite side of the edge of travel lane instead of drawing it to the 4 feet with a positive offset. Maybe you can display that, Kwaku, if you can show like an example of what happens.
So you kind of see what happens here. I set the label, the top of the right side of the milling that ties into the curb to -20, and it displayed on the left.
Yeah.
So like
that's
these axes here kind of show you which side is negative and which side is positive if you
Right.
have your dynamic origin set. So just a grid.
Yeah, it's
Pretty-
basically like a coordinate geometry. So depending on which side, which axis it is on, it will be either horizontal positive, horizontal negative, or vertical positive, vertical negative. And so those parametric constraint labels also follow the same thing. So if you are planning to use those labels to define, either you have to define separate parametric labels for left side or right side, or you can, when you're applying it, you may have to apply it with a positive or negative denomination. So based on that, it'll give you the
Yes.
results that you want.
It's very important to have parametric constraint labels that are unique to the side of your center line that you're on. So let's say like on the right side, each of these labels would be like, let's say width right. So you can identify them in your model file correctly. Otherwise, let's say, for example, we name both of these the same thing. This is slope constraint left. And then this would be slope constraint left. If I go inside of my model file and adjust the slope constraint left parametric constraint, both of these slopes would be changed. Or in the case, like I may be only trying to change this side versus this side. That makes sense.
And also, whenever you're placing the templates, always make sure that the dynamic placement tool is on. Whenever you try to place a next element onto that plus symbol, it will highlight as white. Make sure that when you place it, when it's highlighted as white plus. Otherwise, there will be some space left if you randomly place it here and there. So all elements have to be tied into each other.
Can you go back, Kwaku? Can you go back to the dynamic settings again one more time?
Yep.
So a couple things to note there is you see that step X and step Y. You can set that to a foot or half a foot sometimes, because most of the designs, you have 1 foot gutter band, 12 foot, 11 foot lane, 12 foot lanes, 10 foot lanes, so forth. So those are rounded to a nearest foot, right? So you can create a 1 foot step. What that does is you will see when you do that, you're gonna jump off by 1 foot. So instead of having an exact decimal place, you'll be moving constantly 1 foot horizontally and half a foot, like the way Kwaku is setting. So if you move over to the cursor to the black spot, you will see how the points move as soon as you apply the dynamic settings. So that's what it is. It's one of the functions of that is to control how you place your cursor on that black box. Also in there, you can define your features, and you can also draw the elements based on the keyings. So you have like a horizontal offset keying, vertical offset keyings, and so forth. I don't know if it still exists there in the OpenRoads or not. Yeah, so some of those tools you can key in actually and do it that way. And lastly, the set dynamic origin. What that does is it allows you to set any point on the template as a dynamic origin. So that once you set that point, now any template that you draw will be drawn from that point instead of from the center line. So it can be useful sometimes, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But like Shaik suggested, I also agree with that. I think you should always draw using the dynamic settings all the time when you're drawing anything in that box, because otherwise you're going to be inadvertently drawing stuff at a offset that you don't want to design it at. So this will give you sort of a locked
coordinate
system that avoids that error.
Yeah,
That's mostly useful when like Pushkar said, let's say if you have a divided highway, your baseline will be in the median, but your template will actually start from the, let's say, 15 feet from the baseline. In that case, what you can do is you can set the center line at the 0, but your templates on the left and templates on the right can be different. 15 feet away from the baseline actually. So that is helpful when you do that divided roadway modeling. I mean, most of the time in our cases, it's only going to be either widening or intersection improvements and all those stuff. We don't usually design new roadways. But Kwaku, just explain that wedge and level. If you do the test template, if you hit the test on the right, okay, bringing your existing surface below, you see that the center line of the pavement going all the way. That's mostly done as wedge and level. Basically, yeah.
Can we change the surface slope to 2% in the test condition? So that'll show you what exactly it does.
0.00.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So now if you just like cross the backbones, you'll see version level on one side and fill on the cut on the other side. Can I zoom in on the backbone side? Yeah. You see what's happening is on the left side you have version level. On the right side you have version level, because existing surface on the left side you have version level because your proposed surface is above the existing roadway. And the right side you have a cut, so that would be a full depth. So in this case, this can be defined such that exactly where the full depth begins, you can define a full depth template for that, and the rest of it can be version level. And you can accurately determine how much version level quantity you need by doing that.
Is there anything else? Like, do you guys have any questions? Chat.
Can you go back to the tools and see if we missed any top left? Yeah. Super elevation. Did you define the super elevation stuff in here?
No, we have a separate class for that, but I think we should talk about overrides. When to use overrides and what's the use of it.
So component name override. So you can override the component names in these SHA library templates by just setting them. Let's say if you want to do it for the component itself, you double click the component, click use name override and change it as needed. Or you can do the same for the points and use an override feature name. Generally, I use this if I have, let's say, two components or points that have the same name, but I want them to stay the same technically. I'll just override the name in the template using this tool. Feature name override, set it. say sidewalk back. I'm just gonna say apply, and it'll show this as red, which kind of tells you that it's overridden. So this isn't the actual name that will be displayed in your model here. It'll be the overridden name.
So I think one good example of where you use override, there could be multiple other examples, is when you are using, you have the target aliasing on us. I don't know if you guys familiar with that. So what it is basically you have two potential solutions, or maybe more than one potential solutions with, like, let's say you have a template and you're trying to find the cut or fill points from the existing DTM. But if that doesn't work, you want that to extend to the to
different
another
surface.
DTM, another
Yep.
surface. What you want to do is you want to use that alias on that component, and so that regardless of what solution it finds, the ultimate solution will be named the same. So it could be in the template, like Kwok was showing before, you had a 2-to-1 slope or a ditch. But let's say you want, and then in both cases, you will have a fill slope, right? So the component, the fill slope point name cannot be the same because it's part of two different components. But if you use an alias, override, you can name it the same. So regardless of the solution, that fill slope will still show a 2-to-1 fill, whether it's a part of the just a 2-to-1 slope or the part of the ditch.
And the target aliasing tool push bar is mentioning, I guess we can go over in future lessons. Like you said, you can find different surfaces. Let's say if you have like a GIS surface trying to merge it into like a topo survey surface, you can use target aliasing to identify which surface to find first, second, or third. It's kind of like the priority rules. It's kind of how I look at it.
Go back to the tools again. Cool. I think so. We kind of talked about that override stuff, feature definition to point.
So
That we already talked about that. Alternate surface to points. Maybe you can talk about that briefly.
So I personally don't use this tool much, but I kind of know a little bit about it. Let's say if you have in this section, it wasn't just like a resurfacing. Let me open up a good template to use to about it. Okay, so let's say you wanted to create an alternate surface for your sub base or your base for this pavement. You could select each point associated to that base and provide an alternate surface name so that, like, when you display it, you can display just that surface alone, right? So you can just display.
So it's going to create two DTMs basically. One DTM would be for your top surface, then there will be a DTM for your underlayment surfaces. I think where it can be useful, one example is when you have undercutting your embankment for unsuitable materials. So if you know if OMT has already provided you that from this station to this station you have unsuitable material and it needs to be over excavated. So you will have an over excavation template under your template, and you can use that DTM to calculate how much of that quantity is. Shaik, I think you wanted to share something.
Yeah, and also when you're, let's say you are calculating the payment quantities, right? So the top layer is always a surface layer. The bottom layer, you can name it whatever you want. And when you do the quantities, our OpenRoads can automatically calculate the quantities based off of those surfaces. And that would give you the quantity for the estimate, let's say HMA, 2-inch surface HMA. You can calculate that quantity by having these two different surfaces. So it will be easier for you instead of going manually calculating the quantities. You can just ask OpenRoads to spill the quantities based off of the surface, based off of the volume.
Use of this tool would make a little bit more sense, I guess, if everybody was able to see the component quantities tool and how OpenRoads generates the earthwork for you.
Right.
like if you had alternate surfaces, it would break it down into the different names. And I don't think I can actually do it.
You get a
What I've
cubic
created.
feet. Just keep in mind that, like for example, GAB, you calculate as square yard, so that does not need to be calculated as a volume. But for the asphalt quantities that are usually paid for as tons, if you know the volume, it might be easier for you to convert that to using the specific gravity formula to get a number for the tonnage. It's another way to calculate it. You probably end up still calculating based on the square yards of the GAB and using the lift thickness, but you can do it this way and then compare your calculations, because one advantage of this is any square yards quantities for asphalt, you are doing it in a planimetric 2-dimensional. And whereas this one inroads is going to be doing it in 3 dimensions. So you will get a much more accurate estimate of the volume. But SHA cost estimating manual still requires you to calculate it as square yards, and then apply a 25% or 20% contingency on top of that final quantity. But at least you can do that and kind of cross verify your quantities another way.
Hey, Kwaku, did you cover mirror and the delete components?
I didn't cover them specifically, but I guess I used them and showed how they were used as I was dragging these components over. So, I mean, what Habib is talking about is these tools here. So you can right click, mirror, reflect, or cancel. So let's say if you have like a design where you have curb at both sides at an equal offset from the center line, you can use this mirror tool, for example, and just snap and draw the curb at both sides without having to bring in each individual curb on this side, curb on this side.
Yeah. I personally don't like the mirror tool much. I know it's a productivity tool. One thing it doesn't do is when if you are bringing so maybe we didn't talk about this also, is the adding the apply the affix and prefix and suffixes. So when you are applying the template, predefined templates to your project template, you can make there is an option there where you can apply affixes or prefixes. So what it is like, if it's on the left side, it'll apply a left underscore. If it is on the right side, it'll apply a right underscore and so forth. When you mirror it, it overrides that and it starts to add those affixes and prefixes. So if you are used to doing that, then the mirror tool is going to create more complication for you, because it's going to, especially if you have if you're trying to mirror elements that have multiple components on it and multiple points on it, and it starts to apply affixes, then you have to go back and manually revise all the names, and it just creates a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to fix all those. So if you do it, then just be careful about that and remember to turn off the apply affix and prefixes. And at least before you mirror anything, you got to review what you are mirroring very carefully to see if it already has affixes or prefixes. And then in that case, most of the time SHA templates do have that. So just be careful about that.
And what Pushkar's referring to is essentially just how
See,
this left
that's
side
what
says
happened
L.
is it created a underscore L because it's on the left side, and if it is on the right side, it'll create a, but the component that you're trying to mirror, if it already has those affixes or prefixes and you're trying to mirror, then it's going to create another affix on top of the affix it already has. And that's bad, because like I was saying before, how you name each point and each component is very, very critical for inroads, because that's the only way they know which points to connect in the subsequent template. If those points are all named differently, it will lose that intelligence, and it's going to create a lot of different break lines, and the triangulation will be completely messed up. So quality control on the template is very, very important. Before you even do anything, you push templates or prepare DTMs or whatever you want to do, you want to make sure that your template looks good before you do anything else. It might even crash OpenRoads. I'm not sure if you have, it might go into like a infinite loop if you did not define it. I mean, it happened to me a couple of times. Because of the names were not correct and you were trying to find solutions that it just does not exist. So yeah, defining this is very important.
Yeah, similarly with feature definitions, if you don't have feature definitions set to points, you could experience crashing as well and issues with generating stuff such as quantities.
I think Reddit has a question.
Oh yeah, my question is, I noticed that you're doing this, OpenRoads. So I'm not sure how many people have already transitioned to that. Do you have the full capability, because all these naming codes ultimately will be used, to create your drawings as well in OpenRoads? Like, let's say I have a cut field limit, right? So it's gonna read from this and it's gonna place it on the plan, but do we have the XIN or whatever it's going to be for the workspace for OpenRoads to do that full functionality, or is this just about
it's just about creating templates. So we don't have the workspace and the work set up for OpenRoads yet, but the process of creating a template in OpenRoads and inroads is pretty identical, if not the exact same. Yeah, but I wouldn't do this in OpenRoads right now just because we don't have the workspace and the work set available.
Okay.
So
All
honestly, the template, everything that Gauku just covered, this hasn't changed in my knowledge last 15 years. So
yeah, I was just curious if he has, because we haven't heard anything from State Highway because Bentley doesn't support SS10 anymore, and we want to basically transition to OpenRoads if possible. So I was just checking.
That is a great point.
Some workaround for that, so he can help us. The other thing I have is the parametric constraints. Sometimes where it's used, I just want to let everybody. Let's say you're running this template. You have a driveway cut, right? You want to adjust that curb height. You can use that parametric constraint. I'm just giving an example where you can use a civil cell. That's a little bit complicated, but let's say I just want to have the driveway to be just depressed when I'm crossing a driveway. I just don't want to run this template across a driveway. I can just adjust that height there. That's something I used in the past. Or if I have a ramp, let's say 88 ramp, I can just adjust that height on a station range. That way, when I run the corridor model for the first time, I would just see that curve is actually depressed where it gets a driveway or where it gets to a ramp or something like that. So something I been using just.
So the situation that Radeep just mentioned, there are a few ways to also deal with that. You can use parametric constraints and transition the curve height in your model file.
Yeah.
Or you can use something called the vector offset tool, which kind of allows you to place a vector. And let's say if you have like a curve or something, you could place it at any point infinitely between those two vector points.
Yeah.
I can probably display that at a future lesson and just like run it through a corridor so you guys can actually see how it's used. So like, let's say, for example, if you had like a line, a vector, which is 2 points, sure, and we had, let's say, like a curve template in here. We can use this, apply this vector offset, and then select the 2 parent points, which would be this and this. I don't have them named currently, so I can't necessarily select both of them. We call this 1, this 2, for example. And then let's say if like I know that my curve height transitions 8 feet within these 2 points at a given slope, I can set this vector as such and then allow my edge of pavement or curb height or top of curb point to transition along these 2 vector points. That kind of makes sense to you guys. I know that everything makes a little bit more sense visually once it's ran and we kind of view cross sections and just run through them. But I don't think we had enough time to go through that today. So that will be shown in future lessons.
This was great, Kwaku. I do want to encourage everyone to sort of what you just learned here, for especially if you're working on a project and you are experiencing some issues or you are trying to find a better way to do this, please reach out to anybody here, including Kwaku, but also Shaik, Reddy, Habib, myself. And we can answer those questions. The best way to do that would be going into our Teams channel and posting that question on the team so that whoever is available at that point or whoever gets first answers the question, that kind of a deal, so that it's not all on Kwaku. And I think we can have multiple people kind of contribute to that way.
Yep. And as Pushkar mentioned, a lot of this stuff in inroads and OpenRoads hasn't changed for like the last 15 years. So
yeah, there are plenty of online videos available also on YouTube, as well as on the Virtuoso license that we have. So if you have a MicroStation or OpenRoads on your laptop and you have a Bentley login, because you see on your right side of your screen, you should have a Bentley, what is that called? That blue green
Connect edition, connect stations, I think.
Licensing tool. Yeah. So if you go there and you go to Connect Center, you should be able to create a profile for your own, or it may be already created. There is a whole library of trainings available there, including, I'm pretty sure there is a training on how to create templates from A to Z. Those, again, this is something that for your personal benefit, you should spend time on your own time, kind of reviewing those videos and learning the software. This is an incredible tool because basically MicroStation and OpenRoads is very expensive. So you're basically getting this software, all this training for free through Bentley. And so take advantage of that. And yes, this is what Kwaku is showing on your screen. You can create your learning paths. You can keep track of those trainings. There are multiple 5, 8 minute, 10-minute videos, and also like half an hour, 1 hour long videos you can watch. You can practice alongside because you have the software installed on your computer. So, but you'll not be able to, charge time for that, obviously. So you have your work, but this is an incredible tool for you to learn some of the software that Kwaku is talking about. And then I'm sure like when you do this, you will have questions in your mind. And that's what I'm saying, that we are additional resources to ask those questions and clarify, definition, to correct way of running the software, to troubleshooting, could be anything, like, hey, I'm running into this issue. How do I fix it? What did I do wrong? Those kind of questions can be asked and posted. And sometimes, they have Bentley has even a forum for some. There are sometimes even expert users have questions and they run into issues and they post questions, and then Bentley, their experts will jump in and answer questions. And we have had situations like that in the past. Kwaku, if you can mention, they have a forum for OpenRoads, and they routinely answers questions of certain things. Like these are usually higher level, advanced level users asking, like, okay, we have this situation we're trying to model and we run into this issue. How can we do this using the tools that are available? And a lot of that leads to Bentley updating their software and creating new tools to be able to do those kind of work. So so that is another resource that we have. But I think the first clearinghouse should be us here. If you have any questions, and if you're unable to answer, then we can always go and post stuff on Bentley's website to someone from Bentley to help us.
Also, we had training at BAI in 2022 from Bentley, and I believe all the files are saved on the P drive, right, somewhere?
That is correct. That is before Kwaku joined, so maybe he's not aware of it. But yeah, I think it is all the trainings are saved and the files are saved on our library drive. If you're looking for that information, I think Rick can point you to or anybody who has attended those trainings. I believe JC was on there, Gerard was on that. Can't remember, maybe a couple other people were on there. David was on that, I think. So we
So
can.
that one
ask
is
those.
well organized and it has like exercises and stuff and it goes step by step. So that is a good source to learn, you know.
Right. And the last thing I would say, Reddit mentioned about OpenRoads Designer. Any projects that we are starting now should be done in OpenRoads Designer. Any projects that we're continuing to work on it, it should be done with whichever software we started it with. As far as OpenRoads Designer not having the CAD standards, SHA basically created a managed workspace in ProjectWise. So if you're working on an SHA project and it's a new project and you're going to work on OpenRoads Designer, you absolutely have to use ProjectWise. So that's the long and short of it. You cannot work on the pre-drive. You can make local copies of the files for backup, but all your work needs to be on ProjectWise. Otherwise, it's not going to work. If you're working on like Kwaku is working on a Howard County project, yeah, so we don't have ProjectWise for that, and Howard County does not use ProjectWise. So we are creating a SharePoint, sort of mimicking that. That kind of a thing. But as far as CAD standards are concerned, I don't think the managed workspace from ProjectWise can be downloaded to a local drive. I might be wrong on that, but the idea there is for the Howard County project, we'll be using the default Medley workspace to prepare that design. And then if needed, we will convert the end product to look like a finished product in MicroStation. So we may have to do some work outside of OpenRoads and bring it into MicroStation and fix some of the CAD standards at the end. That might be a workaround, but that's pretty much the direction that SHA has given us.
Any more questions?
For the parametric constraint in your on your template, when you were saying they have to be separate names, is that just for that one template, or does it affect your other templates as well? If you name if something is named similar to like on different templates.
So it's just on that template used for that corridor drop. Do you want to, can you mute yourself? I'm hearing myself.
Oh, my bad, my bad.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
because
just for that template within that corridor drop. So
when you're applying the parametric constraint, you are always giving them a station, start station, end station, right? So wherever your template drops are, if that template drop also happens within the same start and end station, then the parametric control will apply. But if you have another template drop where you have not defined that parametric constraint, it will just definitely, what it will do is it will basically ignore that parametric constraint because it has not been defined in that template. So it's not going to give you an error message. It's just not going to apply it because you have not defined it. So that's why it is so important that you have to have a plan before you do the design. The very first step is to have a schematic done before you even start any OpenRoads or in-roads work. You need to have your layout completed in MicroStation or even in OpenRoads Designer. You need to have the layout completed first. And then, because you're comparing everything based on that layout, you're trying to achieve that layout by doing the modeling, right? The second step is making sure that your templates are defined correctly. All your points, features, parametric constraints, everything has been defined correctly. Everything has been tested, QC'd, make sure everything looks good. Then you start doing your rest of the, I guess, workflow for the OpenRoads to get you the final design product. So I think we can Kwaku, maybe in a future training, we can kind of cover some of those steps before you get to the template.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially because OpenRoads Designer is kind of new to some people. They're not using it now. So maybe just a look and feel of the OpenRoads Designer tools could be useful for future.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not AI, so we need to feed it what you want to get out of it, right? So
Yeah.
maybe they are working something you think, Pushkar, in future
No,
with AI.
I think the one of the challenges with any Bentley products, to my knowledge, is they don't have a predefined workflow. They try to come up with multiple ways of doing things. So any design can be done like 20 different ways, but just like math, there is always an efficient way of doing the work. And as you get more experienced, that's what you gain. You really learn in specific situations what's the efficient way of doing it. And that's what Bentley does is Bentley keeps it open-ended so that you as the end user can choose which tools to use and what to do. They don't define the actual workflow. They don't tell you where to start and where to end. It gives you this plethora of tools and then let you decide how you want to do it. But based on our experience of working on projects, we kind of have some wisdom there, what works, what doesn't work, what creates more problems later on, and so forth. And that's what I think purpose of this training is, also to kind of share some of that so that you can kind of test it on your end also and figure out the best way for you how to design. And I would say the designer to designer, it might vary because you might like designing in a certain way. And Kwaku might do it in another different way. It's not wrong. It might be efficient for him to do it in another way, and for you, it kind of varies on person to person as well. So.
Any more questions? All right. I guess thank you for your time. I'm not gonna have this bleed too much into the afternoon, so.
All right,
guess
thank you,
stop
Kwaku.
sharing.
It was good.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Walker.